Guten Tag, APUSH. We have a new video today. It's the bee's knees by the big cheese himself, Mr. Linegar. Let's make history today as we jaw over Unit 2, Day 5. But first, let's do our daily punishment. A man sued an airline company after it lost its baggage. Sadly, he lost his case. He lost his baggage, then he lost his case. Here are the key terms for today. The Virginia Statue of Religious Freedom, the Quaker Anti-Slavery Society, Republican Motherhood, Abigail Adams, the Articles of Confederation, the Northwest Ordinance, the Land Ordinance, the Day of Algiers, Shays Rebellion, the Annapolis Convention, the Second Constitutional Convention, Alexander Hamilton, James Madison, the Virginia Plan, the New Jersey Plan, the Great Compromise, the Three-Fifths Compromise, the Federalist Papers, and the two factions, the Federalist and the Anti-Federalist. We're going to go over the political developments after the American Revolution, the components and problems with the Articles of Confederation, which was our first form of government, the compromises during the Second Constitutional Convention, the debate and factions and ratification of the U.S. Constitution. So we're going to first talk about what kind of republic America wants to be after the American Revolution. There will be some changes after the American Revolution. Most states, because they're states now, will start to reduce property requirements, so they'll allow all white men to vote for voting. There'll be new trade organizations grew. A larger middle class of laborers and artisans. A lot of states will remove primogeniture laws. Primogeniture laws were laws that came from Britain that said the oldest son inherits everything. A lot of the states will get rid of that. Jefferson is going to help pass in Virginia the Virginia Statue of Religious Freedom, which will give first full religious freedom. One of the good things he does. The Quakers will form the American Anti-Slavery Society. This is one of the first anti-slavery groups found. We talked about the Quakers before. They were always against slavery. During this time, the North and South will still heavily discriminate against freed blacks and slaves. They'll make laws against miscegenation, which is like marriage between blacks and whites. They'll have laws against interracial marriage. And a lot of the states do not want to really push for ending slavery because they think it will destroy national unity. Massachusetts will draft one of the first new state constitutions. It will create a bicameral legislature where it has two legislative branches, like the House and the Senate, and it has three branches of governments. Other states will soon follow. Most states will create Bill of Rights, annual elections of legislators. They'll create weak executive branches because they were afraid of an executive branch gaining too much power, and they'll create judicial branches. This right here is a cartoon for the Quaker Anti-Slavery Society. You see the Quakers right here. You can tell them with their funny hats. And slaves. Bad times. Let's talk about what's going on for women during this time. During the American Revolution, there were some famous women that fought in the American Revolution. Some dressed up as men. Some were nurses. You have people like Molly Pitcher and some other women. So Molly Pitcher was really Mary Hayes. She dressed as a man and fought in the American Revolution. Look, during this time, after the American Revolution, women in the United States will start to think that they should have more rights. This is not the 1900s. They're not pushing for equal rights. They're not pushing for bodily autonomy. But they are pushing for a more American view of liberty. Abigail Adams wrote one of the most famous lines when they were to her husband, John Adams, when they were going into the Constitutional Convention, to remember the ladies, John. Remember the ladies are the ones during the American Revolution. Most women did not fight, honestly. They were not dressing up as men, but like they helped out. They made clothes for the American soldiers. And Abigail Adams was really pushing for that women should be recognized for what they did. Women, however, will not get the right to vote. But what they are going to have is there's going to be a new understanding of what a woman's role is after America becomes independent. And this is called Republican motherhood. Republican motherhood is all about civic virtue, A woman's job is to be the keepers of the national conscience. They're supposed to raise the kids and teach them to be good Americans and understand civic virtue, patriotism. This gives women more of an educational opportunity to kind of like shape the minds of future generations. Look, low key, things still really bad for women. But this is a step up from all women doing is cooking and cleaning and having babies. So this is actually kind of a step up from what was going on earlier. And you should know Republican motherhood. In 1777, during the American Revolution, America will vote and create their first government. This is called the Articles of Confederation. The United States has only had two forms of government. This is the first one that will last around 12 years. This government was kind of trash. It allowed each state, each of the 13 states, to have one vote. Despite the size of the states, they each had the same amount of votes. So population Rhode Island, like with 3 people, has the same votes as population Virginia with like 5,000 people. It really doesn't make a lot of sense. The Articles of Confederation also had no power to regulate commerce. It could not enforce taxation. Also, in order for a law to be passed, you needed 9 out of the 13 states, which is like 2/3, which is a lot. It's really hard to do. In order for an amendment to be passed, like to allow them to freaking do taxation, it needed to be unanimous. So nothing got done with his government. Thomas Jefferson, though, showing that he's an idiot, said it best, where he said it's the best government that has existed or will ever exist. But he'll be proved wrong, like he is with most things. However, to give Jefferson some leeway, there will be a couple of good things the Articles of Confederation does. They're going to pass 2 big laws, the Land Ordinance and the Northwest Ordinance. During the American Revolution, there was controversy of what was going to happen to the land west of the Appalachian Mountains, the Ohio River Valley. Some of the states there, like Virginia, was claiming all that land for themselves, while some of the smaller states said nobody should get that land and it should be opened up to become new states, which is eventually what's going to happen. The Land Ordinance of 1785 is going to set aside public land for education. It's going to create a territorial stage where they become territories before they become states, and then how they become a state. And it also said there will be no slavery in the old Northwest Ordinance area, which is really like the land. Let me show you right here. This is the old Northwest Ordinance area. Like no slavery here. It's in the north anyway. The Northwest Ordinance is going to dispose of Western lands for common good. It'll create new states as well. Really, 2 good things that the Articles of Confederation does. But there were a lot of bad things about the Articles of Confederation, because after the American Revolution, the United States, will have no money. Basically, the Articles of Confederation created 13 separate governments that were kind of allied, but it did not create one unified government. So there's going to be runaway inflation during this time. A lot of the states will be in debt. The Articles of Confederation did allow for a common currency, but states were still able to print their own money, which is going to be problematic. The average citizen will be worse off financially after the war than before. What you're going to see is the excesses of the French Revolution are going to be avoided in the American Revolution because of cheap land was available. So even though there are some economic problems, the fact that the American subjects, the American citizens, could just move west, the whole idea of manifest destiny, they could just buy cheap land west, it kind of prevents that like massive poverty that you're going to see in France with the French Revolution. So you get economic democracy before political democracy. The British are going to be kind of salty at the United States, so they're going to refuse letting American ships trading in the West Indies, like the Caribbean, like Haiti, Cuba, all those countries. One of the British prime ministers, Lord Sheffield, is really going to try to economically punish the United States. The United States, however, could trade freely with other foreign nations, but a lot of those nations, a lot of those other countries like France and other ones loaned out money to America during the American Revolution, and now they want their money back. But America has no money. Oh, wait, I guess America can just like do taxation. Oh, wait, no, they can't because the Articles of Confederation is trash and it doesn't allow for taxation. Oh, wait, they could pass a constitutional amendment. Oh, that requires unanimous consent. And Rhode Island always vetoes it, because Rhode Island are the stubborn trolls of the United States. They veto everything. America also has no respect during this time. It's some bad times. The British will refuse to trade with America. The British troops will remain in North America, which they were supposed to actually get their soldiers out of the Ohio River Valley. Even though the Ohio River Valley was the Americans, the British still keep their soldiers in some of the forts. The British would say this is because the Americans were also violating the Treaty of Paris. The United States was supposed to still pay back the money they owed to British merchants, and they were supposed to give money to like the loyalists that were kicked out of their homes. But after the war, the Americans refused to do that because they have no money. Spain will close off trade in the Mississippi River. France is going to restrict trade also. They're kind of sick of the Americans as well. And the Americans are going to have problems with pirates. Guess what, guys? Pirates are real. One of the pirates was the Dey of Algiers. The Dey of Algiers would attack European ships off the coast of the Mediterranean. Usually he would stop attacking if they did a bribe. So he starts attacking American ships, thinking that he's going to get bribed. Oh, America has no money. Oh no. Guess we can't bribe him. And there's going to be no credit abroad. The big thing that's going to lead to people thinking we need to get rid of this government is Shays' Rebellion. Shays' Rebellion was led by Daniel Shay. He was a hero of the American Revolution. He was a farmer from Massachusetts. During this time, farmers were losing their land. During the American Revolution, a lot of the soldiers were promised to be given money after the war, but they had not paid the soldiers yet. So a lot of the soldiers came back from the American Revolution in poverty, and then they started having their land taken up because they couldn't pay their taxes. Daniel Shay said, this is whack. Why am I having my land taken up? So he's going to lead a revolt against the citizens of Massachusetts. The militia in Massachusetts will not be able to stop them. So this shows that the United States Army couldn't even stop a bunch of drunken farmers. And eventually the wealthy people in Massachusetts will have to pay for a militia themselves to stop Shays' Rebellion. This worries everybody. This government cannot even protect its own citizens. This is bad times. Here you see the Dey of Algiers, and you see Shays' Rebellion. So what's going to happen is there's going to be some people that think we need to have a stronger government or the American experiment is going to be destroyed. And they're going to try to call for constitutional conventions. They're going to be led by a group of demigods, just like our founding fathers, litigers, if you will. The first constitutional convention is going to be met up in Annapolis, Maryland. Only 5 states will attend. This was really pushed by James Madison, who was a Virginian, and Alexander Hamilton. What's going to happen is Madison and Hamilton will then say, let's call for another constitutional convention in a year. And in that time, let's try to convince more states to come. Let's come up with a plan of action so when they do meet, we know what we're going to do. They're going to convince George Washington, who wanted a stronger form of government, to be the real leader of the Federalists, the people that want a new constitution. Rhode Island in the Annapolis Convention will not send any representation. Rhode Island will not send any representation in either convention because they're trolls. In the second Constitutional Convention, this will be George Washington will be the chairman. He's going to lead prestige to the second Constitutional Convention in Philadelphia. Benjamin Franklin will attend, even though he's old and gouty by this time. James Madison is really going to be the one that creates the documents that will create the United States Constitution. Alexander Hamilton will be a firm supporter of a new form of government. He wanted a strong government. Thomas Jefferson, John Adams, and Thomas Paine will all be in Europe. Patrick Henry will not attend. He says, I smell a rat in Philadelphia. He refuses to attend. He does not like what's going on. During this time, there will be no spokesman for the poor. One of the arguments of this time is people like Daniel Shays, Lord Sheffield, the Dey of Algiers, they're all founding brothers because they all showed how trash the Articles of Confederation was. This is the second Constitutional Convention, which was in Philadelphia, not the first one. Famous painting. In this second Constitutional Convention, there will be a lot of compromises. The second Constitutional Convention happens, At first, they were only supposed to modify Articles of Confederation, but right out the bat, James Madison proposes a new form of government, which is the Virginia Plan. It kind of takes everybody by surprise, and basically the people that are opposed to this are on the defensive during the whole time. Some of the small states don't like the Virginia Plan because it creates a legislative branch based on population. So like the bigger states like Virginia, New York, Pennsylvania will have more representation. So there'll be the small state plan will be created by New Jersey. It's called the small state plan. This wanted a legislative branch where one state had one vote, similar to the Articles of Confederation. What's going to happen is Madison, one of his brilliance, is he realized that there does need to be compromise during this time. They're going to create a bicameral legislature, which has the House of Representatives, which is the lower branch based on population, and the Senate, which is the upper branch based on proportion. They'll have 2 senators per state, and the House will be based on population. They will create a 3 branches of government, the president, and they'll create a judicial branch, although at this time they don't really have an idea of what the judiciary branch looks like. There also will be a compromise over slavery. The southern states are going to want slaves to count as a person. This is not because the southern states cared about slaves, but if slaves counted as a person, that means they would have more votes in the House of Representatives. The northern states are like, y'all are ridiculous. They're your slaves. Like, we're not going to count them as any people. Eventually, they'll create the 3/5 compromise, which will allow slaves to be counted as 3/5 of a person, and it will give the option to ban the slave trade by 1808. Here's a little graphic organizer of the Virginia Plan and the New Jersey Plan. So, in the Second Constitutional Convention, we have a new form of government, 3 branches of government, a bicameral legislature. Sounds great. However, a lot of people walked out of the Second Constitutional Convention unhappy with it, and they wanted to oppose this new form of government. Because the Second Constitutional Convention, all it did was it created a proposal, and then 9 of the 13 states need to vote to support the proposal. Now, this right here is where it kind of gets a little bit illegal. If you remember, in the Articles of Confederation, it said all 13 states have to support an amendment. The Founding Fathers realized that they would never get all 13 to agree. So in the Second Constitutional Convention, they made a clause that said only 9 of the 13 have to vote for it to become the new form of government. There will be some people that were not involved in this Constitutional Convention that will become the leaders of the people that oppose the U.S. Constitution. They'll be called the Anti-Federalist. Sam Adams, Patrick Henry, Richard Henry Lee. And then you'll have the Federalists, the people that support this new form of government. George Washington, Benjamin Franklin, James Madison, John Jay, Alexander Hamilton. One of the big complaints of the Anti-Federalist was that its government was too powerful. It gave the executive branch too much power, and also it had no Bill of Rights. At first, the small states will ratify quickly. One of the first big contentious elections will be in Pennsylvania, but it will ratify the government. Massachusetts will be a critical test. It will also pass, despite Samuel Adams opposing it. One of the states that it looked like it was going to be completely rejected in was New York. What's going to happen is some of the Founding Fathers, Alexander Hamilton, John Jay, and James Madison, will start publishing letters arguing for the U.S. Constitution. They'll all take the pseudonym Publius, and they'll publish a series of articles called the Federalist Papers. This is one people actually still read, and they're very brilliant forms of expounding upon American government. By the time Virginia passed, Virginia is going to pass the U.S. Constitution despite opposition. By that time, New York realized they kind of had to pass it because they can't be left alone, and they will pass the Constitution also, despite really the only person supporting the Constitution in New York being Alexander Hamilton. He was from New York. The states that will originally reject the Constitution will be Rhode Island and North Carolina, 2 states that had a whole history of independence, but they're going to be left to their own, but they will eventually ratify the U.S. Constitution as well. A lot of these last states will ratify the Constitution with the understanding that as soon as the government is created, is they will create a Bill of Rights. And Madison will be willing to compromise on this. One of the arguments here is this was a conservative triumph of the minority. More people probably supported the Articles of Confederation over the Constitution, but the Founding Fathers, the elites in American society, realized that the government was untenable, despite what some of the Anti-Federalists thought. And this shows some of the different beliefs of the Federalist and the Anti-Federalist. Federalists favored the Constitution, Anti-Federalists opposed it. What were their arguments? The Federalists argued how weak the Articles of Confederation was. We need a strong government. They wanted checks and balances. They want to protect property rights. Eventually, the Federalists will support a Bill of Rights in order to get the last states to support them. Anti-Federalists will oppose the Constitution. They want strong state governments. They feared a strong national government. They said that a strong executive will be similar to a monarchy. It didn't help that Alexander Hamilton, during the Second Constitutional Convention, was arguing for an elective monarchy. He spoke for 6 hours about how America needed to have an elective monarchy, and it was considered a brilliant speech that nobody listened to. The Anti-Federalists wanted fewer limits on popular participation, and they wanted a Bill of Rights to protect citizens against the government. So here we go. We have a new form of government. Woohoo! U.S. Constitution. Still have it today, kind of. All right, and that's all I have for today, kiddos. Until next time. Deuces. Deuces, yeah.